Hey everyone, good morning. Um, yeah, happy Friday, and glad that y'all could join us. This is the second part of a two-part grant writing series that we've partnered with the Free Library and Caitlin on. Um, the previous training was last Friday and covered the like art of finding grants and also finding grants that fit your organization's mission or program's mission. The training was recorded, and we also have a bunch of resources that Caitlin shared last week that we have on our website. You can access the recording and also all the materials there. I'll send that around after this. And yeah, you can always just go to our website and find it under resources. There's now a page, we're calling it like PRC's training library, where we have recordings of all the trainings that we've done since COVID put us virtual. So the upshot of that is that now the recordings are there for anyone to access at any time. And we're also recording the second part of the training. So feel free to look back at it as soon as probably later today. I don't want to overpromise though. But just by way of introduction, Caitlin works for the Regional Foundation Center at the Free Library and does a lot of these trainings for organizations and also provides one-on-one support for people who are in the nonprofit sector, looking for grant opportunities, but also a lot of other stuff. I'm really grateful to Caitlin. I was saying last week that Caitlin got back to me after I reached out about having this training, like 15 minutes after I asked if this was something that she would be interested in. So yeah, really grateful for her energy and also for the knowledge that we've already gotten. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, TJ. Again, thank you for helping to organize this and reaching out to me. I'm really excited to be back for part 2 of today's series. So thank you everyone for joining me virtually today for Introduction to Proposal Writing. So as TJ said, I'm Caitlin Seifritz. I am the Nonprofit Services Supervisor at the Regional Foundation Center. So I'll be leading today's workshop. I do want to cover a few logistics before we get started. So as TJ mentioned, we are recording today's session, so you can refer back to this recording at any time. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share the slides with you because they're provided by Candid, which I will talk more about in just a minute. However, I am going to share a link to a resource guide in the chat. So that resource guide covers all of the resources that we're going to be talking about today. It also has a couple of handouts right at the top. One is a broad overview of all of the slides. So all of the key information from the slides will be included in that first handout in the resource guide. The second link in the guide is going to be a little activity that we're going to be working on later today. And then if any other resources come up during today's presentation, I'll make sure to update that resource guide so you have that information. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. I'm going to be stopping a few times throughout the presentation to answer any of those questions that have come in. So feel free to add them as you think of them. And then later on in the workshop, once we've kind of finished the presentation, I'll let people unmute themselves so that they can ask questions that way. I know sometimes it's easier to speak a question than to write it out. So if you could just wait until the end to do that. And then lastly, just like last week, I will be sharing a link to a program evaluation. We'd really love to hear your feedback on today's session. Anything else you'd like to see the Regional Foundation Center present. Your feedback not only helps us improve our programs, but it helps us show our funders how we are supporting the nonprofit community. So participating in that is really helpful to us. So for those of you who were not here for last week's session, I do just want to briefly share a little bit more about who we are and what we do. The Regional Foundation Center is a nonprofit resource center at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And we have been serving Philly's nonprofit community since 1974. So in a couple of years, we'll be celebrating our 50-year anniversary. So I have to start planning something big and exciting. So we offer access to high quality research databases like Foundation Director Online, which we talked about last week. And then we also offer free workshops and one-on-one research appointments with librarians. So we are part of the Business Resource and Innovation Center, or as we like to call it, the BRIC. And the BRIC is a space for nonprofit professionals, entrepreneurs, job seekers, and inventors. We are located at the Parkway Central Library on the ground floor. So you can see a picture of our space on the slide here. So we opened this brand new space back in April of 2019, and it offers comfortable furniture. We have free Wi-Fi. We also have meeting rooms that you can reserve. So if you're looking to get together some people from your organization, maybe you're holding a board meeting and you need some space for that, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to offer up our meeting rooms for that. So right now, most of our appointments and our programs are still virtual. We are starting to slowly move to offering more in-person programs starting in April. But you're always welcome to come in and visit our space. We're currently open Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I hope you will come and check out our space sometime. And if you do, definitely stop by and say hi. So I do just want to quickly mention how we are associated with an organization called Candid. So Candid is the result of a merger between two other nonprofit organizations, Foundation Center and GuideStar. We talked about GuideStar last week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them today. But those two organizations have long been leaders in the philanthropic world in the kind of area of collecting data on the philanthropic scene. So the merger of these two organizations just means even more data is being collected on the philanthropic sector. So you may be wondering, what does this have to do with the Regional Foundation Center? Well, we are part of Candid's Funding Information Network. So this is a network of libraries, community foundations, and nonprofit resource centers across the globe where you can access databases, print materials, and free classes. So we get our materials for our intro classes from Candid, which is why I'm not able to share the slides with you. I know people like slides. I do apologize. But as a reminder, that resource guide I shared in the chat does have a link to a handout that includes highlights from today's slides. I also like to mention that we're part of Candid's Funding Information Network because if any of you on the call today are not in the Philly area, or if you find yourself in a new city in the future, there's a good chance that there is a location like us in your new city. And later on today, I'm going to pull up a website called Candid Learning, where you can learn more about different locations across the country. All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to do some interactive polling. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a website called Slido. So go ahead and click on that link, and you're going to have to put in a code. The code is RFC. It's on the screen here. You'll see it says join@slido.com. Then it says the code, which is hashtag RFC. You just have to put in RFC. Once you've done that, it will give you a poll question. So the first question for today is, when you hear the words grant or grant writing, what words come to mind? So go ahead, click on that link, Slido, put in the code RFC, and then answer that first question. So once people start answering the question, their responses are going to show up on the screen here. So we already have one person weighing in. We have work, money, complicated, impact, writing, scary, confusing, technical, time sensitive, complicated, intimidating, long process, foundations, funding, opportunities. Money continues to get bigger. What else? Inaccessible, intimidating, hassle, overwhelming, money for nonprofits or research, scary. Can't remember if I've said that one already. I need major help. All right, so it sounds like there's a bit of a theme here. It sounds like you are all not a fan of grant writing or scared of the process if you haven't done it before. So my hope for today is that after our time together, the words that you associate with grant writing are not so intimidating or scary or stressful, and that you'll feel a little bit more confident in your ability to apply for grants. All right, so we have another question for you. So this one's going to be a multiple choice question. So this one is, how long do you think that the grant seeking process typically takes? So does it take 1 month? Does it take 2 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, or 6 to 9 months. So go ahead and choose the option you think best answers the question. So it looks like we have 3 to 6 months winning so far, with 6 to 9. Oh, nope. Tied for second is 2 to 3 months and 6 to 9 months. Give people a couple more seconds to respond. All right. So it looks like 3 to 6 months is winning with 53%. So we're actually going to talk a little bit more about this, but the answer is actually 6 to 9 months. I will say that in the wake of COVID, funders have been trying to get money out a little bit quicker, and hopefully that trend does continue. But we usually just kind of tell nonprofits to expect the process to take 6 to 9 months. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later on. All right, so I have one more poll question for you. So I want you to kind of put yourself in the funder's shoes. So pretend that you are a funder, you work for a foundation, you have grant money to give out. What would you want to know about an organization or project before providing support? Exactly how the money will be used. Good. Mission or goals of the organization? Yes. Who's on the team? Does it align with your mission? Why the work is important? Effectiveness of your organization? That they have measurable outcomes that meet their mission, their target audience? Does it match my organization's mission? What the organization does? How long the project will last? How can my organization support their work? How do they measure impact? Are they capable of delivering the results? Awesome. Past success. How are they with existing dollars? Is it aligned with the mission? How much of the money will wind up supporting the participants? Good. Excellent. So I always love to ask this question at the beginning of this workshop, because I think it shows all of you that you know so much already about proposal writing and what funders want to know. Every single thing you've put here is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So it isn't like there is some secret code out there that I'm going to give you and you're now going to be able to write the best grant proposal ever. You already know exactly what it is that makes a good grant proposal. So again, hopefully after today, we'll be able to kind of finesse some of these things a little bit, and that you will feel more confident in your ability to help or to get grants for your organization. All right, so I just need to kind of switch my screen here for a second. Give me 1 minute. Sorry about that. Okay, let me get back into full screen. Okay, awesome. So thanks everyone for participating in those poll questions. I think it's a really fun way to kind of get us starting and start thinking about the proposal writing process. So today's class is going to provide you with an overview of how to write a standard project proposal to a foundation. So during today's session, we're going to be talking about the basic elements of a proposal, the do's and don'ts of writing and submitting a proposal, how to follow up on your proposal, whether the answer is yes or no. And then we're also going to spend a little bit of time at the end working on an activity to help get you started. So upon completion of today's training, you should be able to do the following: list the basic elements of a proposal, draft a standard project proposal, identify next steps for submitting a grant proposal, and follow up with funders after submitting a proposal. So to begin our discussion, we are going to start by looking at the proposal writing process as a whole. So it's important to know that proposal writing is part of a process that includes planning, research, writing, and follow-up. And keep in mind that building relationships with donors and potential donors, or in this case, funders, is also a really important aspect of all types of fundraising. So as much as you may just want to, write your grant proposal and send it off, you can certainly do that, but the more relationships you can build with your network, with funders, potential funders, the more successful you're going to be. The thing to remember here is that you can devote a lot of time and possibly money to produce a well-written proposal. But if you've skipped one of these steps, your proposal probably won't be as successful as it could be. All right, so the first step in the proposal writing process is planning. So what do you need the money for? And this is an important first step in the process because grant seeking is very competitive and you need to be very prepared when approaching funders. In getting started, you need to make sure you give yourself enough time to go through each step of this process so that you can end up with a competitive proposal. Once you submit the proposal, a foundation will have its own process for reviewing the many requests that it receives. So as we discussed just a minute ago with that poll question, it can easily take 6 to 9 months from the date your proposal is submitted to the date that you receive a check. So you want to be if you want to be absolutely sure, you might want to even give yourself a year. Each funder has different timelines. Some get back to you really quickly. Some might not get back to you for 2 to 3 months. And then it still takes a little while to get the check to you. So keep in mind that grant writing foundation funding is really not going to be a quick fix for your organization. Certainly throughout the year, funders will have different timelines. So it's not like, oh, we have to submit all of our grant proposals in January and then we'll hear back in the fall. You're going to be doing this throughout the year. But just keep it in mind that it can take 6 to 9 months. Next, you'll need to decide what kind of support you're going to need. So funding for general operating, funding for a specific project or program, or something else such as equipment or building renovations. So it is often easier to secure funding for a specific project or program than it is for general operating. And that's just because it's easier for funders to measure direct impacts and outcomes if it's tied to a specific project. It can be really hard to measure how salaries and rent benefit the community and not just the organization itself. Again, I think I mentioned this during our last session. We're starting to see more funders be more open about providing general operating support and multi-year grants. So that is something that's a little bit easier to get, but it is still easier to get grants for projects or specific programs. So with that in mind, today we're going to focus on preparing a project proposal, though the process is often similar for a proposal for general operating support. So if you're writing a grant proposal for general operating, instead of focusing on a specific program or project, you will apply the same elements that we're going to talk about today to your organization as a whole. Next in the process is research. So before you start writing your grant proposal, you really want to know as much as you possibly can about the funder. Thorough research helps you know who you're approaching and why. So when we ask funders what the number one reason is why a proposal isn't funded, they often say it's because it wasn't the right fit for what they're looking for. So that's why finding the right match between what you plan to do and the funder's interest is critical to the success of your proposals. Many proposals focus on what's in it for them, so what's in it for the organization, and few pay enough attention, if any, to what's in it for the funder. So a grant proposal should be viewed as a win-win proposition or a mutually beneficial relationship where each party gets something out of it. This win-win proposition begins with identifying what the funder cares about and is most interested in funding. So if you took our Introduction to Finding Grants workshop last week, we discussed how to use Foundation Directory Online to help you identify funders who give to your fields of interest, geographic focus, and provide the type of support you're looking for. So hopefully you all walked away from that workshop understanding the importance of thorough research. And for anyone who did miss that workshop, definitely check out the recording on the website. And last but not least, remember the why is as important as the who, meaning once you've identified a list of potential prospects, You need to tell them why they should care about your particular project or program based on their specific interests. How will it help them achieve their goals as well as your own? So the next step in the process is writing. So that's what we're going to be talking a lot about together. And this is just how you put all this information together. And then finally, we're going to discuss how to follow up with a funder. I think this step in the process is one of the most overlooked in the process, but it's really important because it kind of plays into that relationship building piece of fundraising, and it will help, potentially open up some other doors for you. And if you remember nothing else, you want to keep this tip in mind. Always follow the funder's guidelines. This can cover everything from word count limitations to requested attachments. So I'm going to just first briefly talk about formatting. So many funders use online formats, or they might have their own application form. And in many geographic regions, the Regional Association of Grant Makers, which is a membership organization for foundations in a specific region, have created a common grant application form that will enable you to submit the same application to multiple funders. So in the Philadelphia area, this application lives on the Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia's website. So I'm going to pull that up later on so you can see where to find it. I will just mention that very few funders still accept this application. It used to be a lot more popular, but people have kind of moved away from it. But I still think it's really helpful to look at because you can get a sense of common questions that are often asked. So if you're completely new to grant writing, I always recommend taking a look at what funders are asking for, what the typical application process is like, so you can kind of familiarize yourself with the types of questions that funders ask. And no matter what format the funder requires, the types of questions will be similar. So it's also important to note that some funders will not have a specific format at all, but they'll just ask you to provide answers to a series of questions. So if they don't have a specific format, then the kind of loose structure we're going to be talking about today is a good one to use. But either way, I recommend putting together a boilerplate proposal using the format we're going to go over for each program or project for which your organization needs funding. It's a good way to think through all the questions a funder might ask, regardless of what format you will eventually put the information in. In addition, it can be really hard to write and edit your proposal in the limited space and character restrictions most online applications provide. So it's really helpful to have a basic template from which you can cut and paste descriptions and information into the online application. I recently was filling out an application, not for a grant proposal, but for something else. And I was working on it in a Word or a Google document, and they gave me a character limitation. I was like, oh, they're probably not serious about that. And then when I went to copy and paste it into the actual application, they're like, you've exceeded the character limit. So pay attention to that and believe it when they say that there is a character limitation. It's just going to make for a far less stressful situation when you go to actually apply for a grant. Also keep in mind that with many online applications, there isn't a way to save your work once you've started. So you don't want to lose your information. So that's why having a boilerplate that you can copy and paste from is a good backup plan in case something does happen. But even with having a template, having a boilerplate, you want to remember that a proposal is like a resume when you're looking for a job. You still want to tailor it to meet the job description, or in this case, the funder's guidelines and interests. But having a boilerplate is a good place to start. All right, so before I get into the specifics of the proposal elements and what funders really want to know, I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions. It looks like we had a few come through. All right. Oh, so the Common Grant application is available through the Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia. I'm going to pull it up later on. There's also a link to it in your resource guide. What was that? Yeah, so Common Grant application through the Philanthropy Network. Someone asked, how do you suggest one one of those who are difficult to research, such as a private family foundation who give grants. So if a foundation gives grants, if they're considered by the IRS as a private foundation, then they're going to be listed in Foundation Directory Online, which we talked about last week. So that's a really great place to start. If we kind of talked about this a little bit, but if they're a funder that does not take unsolicited requests, meaning they aren't sending, you can't just send them a grant proposal, then you may want to put together a letter of introduction about your organization. So letting them know who you are and the work that you do. But I would definitely start researching foundations using Foundation Directory Online. That's a good starting point. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to move on. So these are the basic elements of a standard proposal. So you're going to have to create an executive summary. We're going to talk about that later on. And then we're going to talk about the narrative, which is going to be the largest and most detailed section of your proposal. So this section will usually be around 5 pages. Again, depending on what the funder is asking for, but that's something to kind of keep in mind. And the narrative will include your statement of need, the proposed project, your organizational history and background, and then a conclusion. And I'm going to talk about each of these elements in more detail. You'll also have to include a budget along with other supporting materials. So we're very briefly going to touch on the budget today. But if you want to know more about how to prepare a project budget, I included a link in your resource guide to a webinar called Introduction to Project Budgets. I would definitely recommend checking that out because it's a really important piece of your proposal. And then we'll also briefly talk about supporting documents as well. All right, so we're going to kind of start this conversation off and kind of start to think through that narrative section by posing our discussion around what funders really want to know. So in order to write an effective proposal, you must be able to make a compelling case for support. A grant is an investment, and with any investment, the funder is looking for a high rate of return with a low risk. So what do I mean by that? Think of a grant as an investment in your organization, the issue you're trying to solve, your constituents, your community, and your impact. A low risk means that you are capable of carrying out this project in the most effective and efficient way. I know that was something that a few people put in the poll question earlier when I asked if you were a funder, what would you want to know? It kind of hits all of those things right there. So with all this in mind, here are the questions most, if not all, funders will want to know the answers to. They may word them slightly differently, but this is what it all kind of boils down to. So what specific need are you addressing? What are you trying to achieve? What is your strategy for making it happen? How will you know if you're successful? Why are you the best organization to do this work? And how will the project sustain itself in the long run? So each of these questions is listed on that handout in your resource guide. So you don't have to write all of them down. And I'm going to talk about each of them in more detail. So first, what specific need are you addressing? So you can also think about this as your statement of need. So this is going to tell the reader what problem you are trying to solve and why they should care. So your statement of need should address these questions. What is the problem your project will address? Who is affected by the problem and how? What facts and statistics can be used to substantiate the problem and the impact on the affected population? So keep in mind when I'm talking about need or the need statement, I'm not talking about the need of your organization. I'm talking about why your organization exists or what the project is aiming to solve. Keep in mind that it's not enough to just simply state the problem. You will need to back it up with supporting facts and statistics. And you want to make sure that your facts and statistics are relevant to the specific population and community that you are serving and fits the size and scope of your solution. So if you're in Philadelphia or a specific part of Philadelphia, you want to talk about information relevant to that particular area. Talking about national statistics isn't going to be as useful in this case. Funders are really going to want to know about your specific population. And no matter how serious the problem is, you don't want to paint such a grim picture that the situation appears hopeless, no matter how much money a funder might give you. It may be tempting to say, this is terrible, this is horrible, we're never going to be able to solve this problem. But what funder is going to want to fund that if you tell them we don't have a solution or we're not going to be able to fix this problem? So if you're looking to use statistics or data, there's a few places where you can get information, and I've included links to them in your resource guide. So one is called Policy Map, and this is a free mapping tool which offers a ton of data on communities across the country. Everything from basic demographics to who has access to grocery stores to where people have the most access to internet. So another useful resource for data and statistics is a resource called Issue Lab. Issue Lab gives you access to free research reports on a variety of topics and issue areas. So you could choose your organization's issue area and see a number of reports on that specific topic. So like I said, I included links to both of those in your resource guide. I also included a link to Pew Charitable Trust State of the City. So every year they come out with the State of the City report, specifically about Philadelphia. It has a lot of really great data in there. They also do a number of other reports as well. So I recommend checking those out. And if any of you have any resources for data and statistics that you use often, please feel free to share them in the chat. Since you are all working with returning citizens in some capacity, I think it's really helpful to share resources that you've relied on. Also keep in mind that some of the resources that you might be using for data and statistics can be internal as well, based on what your organization has observed. So somebody asked in the chat, how are citations done in proposals for statistics? So I recommend just putting a link to where the information is from. Especially if you have a limited number of character counts, you don't want to spend a ton of time or a ton of characters writing in where the source is, but always include where the source is from. So a link should be sufficient for that. This isn't a college paper. Funders aren't necessarily worried about whether you're using, MLA format or Chicago format, that type of thing. But it is important to include statistics. So somebody asked, do you put the link in the paragraph or at the end of the proposal? I think that's more of a style choice. If you're able to just easily link in right in the narrative that you're writing, that's probably going to be easier. So a funder or whoever is reading it can quickly see what the source is. If you're able to submit a proposal through a Word document, then you might be able to add like a footnote, that type of thing. It's probably going to be a little bit dependent on what format you're using to submit the application. Yeah. So yeah, anyone else have any resources that they turn to for data or statistics? Feel free to share those in the chat. I know I always learn about a new resource when I pose that question during the class. And even though statistics and data are really important, you don't want to just focus on the numbers. You want to make sure that you're telling a compelling story and that there's a human face on the need that you're addressing. So you want to include a mix of, we're going to talk about this, qualitative and quantitative information. Okay. So the next question is, what are you trying to achieve? So the project description is going to be the longest and most detailed section of your proposal. And this section is where you will describe exactly how you plan to address the issue you raised in your needs section with measurable outcomes. So this section will usually begin with a statement of project goals and objectives. So people and even funders use these terms differently, but for our purposes today, we'll say that goals are broad, general statements about what you plan to accomplish. Objectives flow from the goals, and they are specific and measurable within a realistic time frame. So some people like to use the SMART acronym to describe their objectives, which means your objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, and realistic within a defined time frame. And if you need more information about SMART or SMART goals or objectives, you can Google. There's a lot of great information out there about how to be smart. You should also discuss whether the issue is currently being addressed, and if so, how will your solution be different? So people often trip themselves up with goals and objectives. I know it can be a little bit challenging. So here are some very kind of rudimentary examples. So one example is, say the goal of your organization is to increase reading levels of children who are reading below grade level. Very broad, not super specific. An objective may be that you are trying to increase the reading level of 75% of students within 1 year. So right there, we're a little bit more specific. We have a certain number of students we're hoping to increase the reading levels for, and we have a specific time frame in which we're going to do this. Another example, maybe you want to increase the number of returning citizens who have access to career services. Again, fairly broad, fairly general. So an objective may be, we want to connect 75% of our clients with workforce development workshops and consultations within 1 year. Obviously, each organization is going to be different. Your goals and objectives are going to be different. But it is important to think through these things because funders are going to want to know what it is you're trying to achieve. Your project description should also detail the particular methods you will use to implement your project. In other words, what are your specific strategies for accomplishing your goals and objectives? So this section details your plan of action, which should clearly explain the who, what, where, when, and how of your strategy. How will your plan be implemented, including who will do the work, what is going to happen, where will it happen, and when will it happen? In addition to a well thought out description, you should also include a timetable or step-by-step plan showing exactly how the plan will be executed and completed. Thinking about how you will measure and monitor your goals and objectives is also something you should plan to do. You don't want to get to the end of your grant cycle and realize that you're not going to be able to, do what you say you're going to do. So make sure you're building in ways to measure and monitor your goals throughout the life cycle of the project or the grant period is really important. You also want to be sure to emphasize any collaborations or partnerships that you may have with other organizations or community groups. Funders like to see organizations working together in collective and innovative ways rather than duplicating their efforts. So you already have this amazing coalition of nonprofit organizations in Philadelphia doing similar work. So if you all have opportunities to partner or collaborate together, definitely take advantage of those. I know sometimes that's a little bit easier said than done, but funders really do love to see organizations working together to achieve similar goals. And along those same lines, if you believe that your project is replicable and could be a model for others, definitely include that information as well. It'll help demonstrate that funding your organization or project will have a more long-lasting and far-reaching impact. The bottom line is you should view your proposal as an organizing plan. It will show a funder that you have thought through the project and what you hope to achieve. So somebody asked, what happens if an organization falls short of their goals? Can a funder request a refund? So a couple things. One is if you've built in, monitoring whether or not you're going to meet those goals or not throughout, you shouldn't get to the end of the grant period and have to tell a funder, we weren't able to do what we said we were going to do. If you get a few months in or halfway into the project and you're like, this is not going as we had planned, I'm sure that happened for a lot of people during COVID. reach out to the funder and let them know. They may be able to tell you how you can maybe reallocate some of the money, or maybe you could offer other suggestions for what makes sense for revamping your goals. So definitely loop them in. I mean, they could, in theory, request a refund, I guess. I think what's more likely to happen is that they will not fund you in the future, though. So that's why having really good communication with them, being honest and open about any struggles you're having is really important to this process. So that's a good question. All right. So that kind of ties into our next piece. How do you know if you're successful? So how you will evaluate your project is something funders are going to ask. Your evaluation process will show them, but also you, if you've achieved your goals and objectives. So, don't think about this just from a funding perspective. You also want to know if your programs, your projects are successful. Are you helping the people that you say you're going to be helping? So keep in mind that this isn't just about the funder. It should also be very much about your organization and knowing if you're successful and the impact you've made. So there are many kinds of evaluation techniques, which will depend on many different factors for your organization. But here are a few things to keep in mind. First, as I mentioned earlier, you must start by specifying your program objectives in measurable terms. Once you've done that, you can then identify key indicators of success based on your goals and objectives. Some things are obviously easier to measure than others, like how many people a food bank serves versus how you measure the success of a mentoring program for teenage girls. So you should be including both quantitative and qualitative measures. Quantitative just means numerical, so numbers like how many people does a food bank serve, and qualitative is more kind of anecdotal measurements. So, for example, if our goal is to raise the self-esteem of teenage girls, how would we go about measuring our success or impact? So some quantitative examples would be to look at if there's been a decrease in detentions or absences, decrease in fights or visits to the office. Maybe they have higher grades or test scores. So again, all of these things can be counted and measured numerically. Qualitative measures are based more on subjective measures, such as stories and anecdotes. So measures we would look at to see if we've raised the self-esteem in teenage girls may include quotes from teachers and parents. Maybe we've asked them to create a journal or participate in peer discussion groups. Their responses in those two formats might give us good insight. Maybe they are more involved in student activities or engaged in less risky behavior, and just more generally have a positive outlook on life. They're talking about future plans and goals. So once you've defined what you will measure, you can come up with methods on how you will collect the data and analyze your activities. You should also develop a timeline for monitoring the success of your program on an ongoing basis. Just like I said before, you don't want to just wait until the end. You want to make sure you're on track from the beginning. Next question is, why are you the best organization to do this work? So at some point in your proposal, you will need to give the reader information about your organization as a whole. And you can do this at the beginning or end. But this is where you talk about your mission, organizational history, along with other programs and services, your accomplishments, your reputation, your visibility in the community, and your track record of success. Bear in mind that most foundations will be looking for a track record of significant accomplishment. If your organization is new and you don't yet have a track record, you may have some difficulty in securing foundation support. If that's the case, you might want to shift your fundraising strategy and spend your first year or two gathering support from individuals in your community who are in a good position to know your personal reputation and see the good work that you're doing. So we often tell nonprofits, newer nonprofits, that it can be really hard to get a foundation grant during your first 2 years of operations, just because you don't necessarily have that track record of success yet. So in addition to turning to your board and individuals in the community, this might be a really great opportunity to partner with a more established organization with a similar mission or audience. You can go in on a grant together that will help you build your experience with the process, and then you'll be able to show future funders that you've received funding in the past. How will the project sustain itself in the long run? So foundations tend to think in the long term, which I find somewhat ironic considering how little of multi-year grants they give, but separate conversation, I guess. So before funding your project, they may be concerned about how you sustain itself after the grant period ends. So oftentimes grants only are for 1 year. No foundation is going to fund you forever, and your nonprofit cannot exist on grant support alone. So you need to think through how your organization will support itself in the long run. Do you have a business plan? How will you support your work if grant funding is not readily available? Overall, you should be sure to look for diverse streams of funding. So in your resource guide, there's a link to an introduction to fundraising planning webinar, which can really help you think through how to diversify your funding. I'll also note that the Regional Foundation Center, we're in the midst of our Diversify Your Funding series. So we actually just offered Introduction to Fundraising Planning earlier this week, but there's still a chance to join in on the series. Next week, we're going to be talking about corporate giving, and then the following week, we're going to be talking about individual giving. So if you're looking to explore more funding opportunities beyond foundation grants, you might want to check out one of those classes. So what all these questions boil down to is what makes a good grant proposal? And this is a question that is asked frequently. So who better to answer that question than a funder? So there is a link in your resource guide to a video called What Makes a Good Funding Proposal, which includes a response from a program manager about what she looks for in a grant proposal. So I'm not going to play the video for you today. It usually doesn't translate well over Zoom, but definitely take a look at that video. It's not very long, but I did want to cover a couple of the highlights. So first is a personalized and customized proposal with a clear ask is really going to help make a good proposal. And that clear ask is really important. Your grant proposal should always include the amount you are asking for. You don't want to leave it up to the funder to guess how much you're asking for. So remember to research the typical grant size a funder gives out so you have a good sense of how much you should be asking for. We talked a little bit about that in Introduction to Finding Grants last week. If you are a startup organization, this program manager recommends that if you don't yet have a track record from an organizational standpoint, talk about the track record of your leadership that is leading the organization. So your executive director, your board members, and your staff members. And if you are working with any key partners, make sure to talk about them as well. Basically, you want to answer the question, who are you in a relationship with, or who are you working with? So if funders see that you have this buy-in from other partners, you have this strong leadership, they're going to be more likely to give to your organization, even if you are newer. You want to make sure that you focus on outcomes and impacts, so change in your community on a large scale, and not just the inputs and outputs. So this is something that can be very difficult for people to wrap their heads around, but your inputs are your people and resources, things like your space. And outputs are things like the number of people you serve, the hours that you're open, that type of thing. And while those things are certainly important, what funders really want to know is what is your larger impact? So go beyond those outputs and inputs. Talk about what has changed or what will change because of your organization. This particular program manager also reminded everyone to include a source for your statistics and data, which we talked about a little bit earlier on. They just want to make sure you're not just kind of pulling numbers out of air, or they might also be interested in learning where the data is from themselves so they can investigate more. If you've done your homework, it becomes a lot easier to write your proposal. So if you're confident that you know that the funder is interested in funding this, if you've put your boilerplate information together, it's really going to be a much easier process. The first couple of times might be a little bit rougher, but once you get a little bit more used to the process, it will get easier. And then the last tip she has is to be clear and that brevity is key. Don't say something in 20 words that you could easily have said in 10 words. Funders don't care about flowery language. Also, because you are often going to have character and word count limits, you're sometimes going to have to take out a lot of those adjectives anyway. So from the get-go, be clear and concise. So hopefully you now have a better sense of what funders want to know. So I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions. Yep. So if you, so somebody asked for the links to our Diversify Your Funding webinars. So you can just go on our website, freelibrary.org/nonprofit. All the details about those upcoming workshops are there. I also have a slide about them later on in the presentation. Any other questions about what funders want to know? Hopefully you realize that what I just talked about is pretty much on par with what all of you shared when I asked that poll question earlier about what you would want to know about an organization if you were going to give them funding. So somebody asked, does typically who you know override what you know in some cases? So I wouldn't say so. I think knowing somebody can help you get your foot in the door. But if you still aren't able to put together a comprehensive grant proposal, then they're still not going to fund you. So starting to build a relationship with funders, tapping into your network, seeing if anyone on your board, any of your partners can make an introduction to you, that's a really great way to start the relationship, but it by no means guarantees that you're going to be successful in getting funding from that funder. So definitely don't just coast on who you know. Use it as an opportunity at the beginning, but then make sure you're backing that up with a clear ask and following through with what you say you're going to do and putting together a really strong grant proposal. Other questions? All right, so I do want to talk about a couple other parts of the proposal, and we're going to talk about follow-up, and then I want to make sure we have time for the activity. So I'm going to move ahead, but continue to put your questions in the chat. So the last but not least is the conclusion to your proposal, not to our webinar today. You should end with a compelling conclusion which speaks to why this particular funder should fund this project. It doesn't have to be long. We're talking about a paragraph or two, but your goal here is to answer what I call the so what question. If this project is funded, how will life be better and for whom? And why should this particular funder care? How will this be a mutually beneficial partnership? So I think it might be easy, especially after you've written all this other stuff in your proposal, to kind of think of the conclusion as a throwaway, but it's just an opportunity to tie everything together, remind the funder of what it is you're trying to do and how it aligns with their mission. So don't overlook the conclusion of your grant proposal. So I'm talking about the executive summary last because it is one of the most important parts of the proposal, because it's often what the reader will read first to determine if they want to read the rest of the proposal. So if it doesn't catch the reader's attention right away, they may or may not continue reading. So it also may help to have an executive summary on hand when making an initial approach to a funder. So it's good to have a one-page summary, whether a funder asks for it or not. So most people who write proposals find it easier to write the full proposal first and then extract key information to put it into a one-page summary. So basically, you're condensing your proposal down into one page, and you will include your statement of need, the name of the project you will be requesting money for, a brief description of your project, including the goals and objectives, information about your organization, and how much money you're asking for. So keep in mind, the executive summary is not a summary of your organization. It is a summary of your proposal. There will be some information about your organization in there, but it really is meant to serve as kind of a mini proposal for what you're asking for. So like I said, might be easier to write the full proposal first and then come back and write a summary of what you've included in that full proposal. And then along with your proposal, you'll need to send a number of documents as requested by the funder. So one is a copy of your IRS letter of determination to show that you are a legal nonprofit. So first and foremost, you must have your 501c3 status. Foundations are required by the IRS to give to charitable organizations for charitable purposes, and they have to report that information to the IRS. So they can't give money to your organization without it. And if you don't have your 501c3 status, I did include some links in the resource guide on where you can get more information about starting a nonprofit. I also included information in there about fiscal sponsorship, where you work with an existing nonprofit and use their 501c3 status to apply for grants. So if you don't yet have your 501c3 status, definitely take a look at those resources because you are going to have that or be working with a fiscal sponsor in order to get grants from a foundation. The funder is also going to want you to send other financial documents along with your proposal budget, such as your organization's most recent audited financial statements, your 990, and sometimes they'll often ask for a general operating budget for the past few years. So things like audits can be expensive. So if you don't have something a funder requests, don't just leave it out. Call them and ask them if they'll accept something else instead. So every time I teach this class, somebody always asks a question about accountants and audits. So I've added some links in the resource guide that has information on some local nonprofits that specifically work with nonprofits, local accountants, excuse me, who work with nonprofits, as well as a blog post that we created last year called Ask an Accountant. So we kind of interviewed a local accountant that works with nonprofits, and he shared some really great information about what it's like to work with an accountant. He also included how much some things cost. He also shared a cautionary tale about why it's important to hire an accountant. I tell nonprofits that the best piece of advice that I can give them is to hire an accountant. Especially at the beginning, you want to make sure everything is set up the right way, that you're doing what you're supposed to do on the financial end. If you don't do things right the first time around, you're going to end up paying for it later. So it's worth the cost of hiring an accountant at the beginning so things don't go totally off the rails. The funder is also oftentimes going to request a list of your board of directors. So you want to make sure to provide names along with any professional affiliations. It's also a good idea to supply brief biographical information on your key staff members to point out once again that the people who are carrying out your project have sufficient knowledge and experience to ensure it's a success. The main thing here is to include everything the funder asks for and very little of anything else. So they typically do not want additional materials, such as like books, videos, pamphlets, that type of thing. If you have those, you can refer to them in your proposal and let them know that they're available upon request. But I don't recommend including them unless they specifically ask for them. And for online applications, it's totally fine to add links to additional information where possible. I'm sure for many of you, a lot of the key information about your organization lives on your website. But overall, you want to make sure that your proposal is legible and easy to read with no typos. And you want to make sure that if you are submitting it, a physical copy, that there's no like fancy fonts or binders that you're using. Sometimes, again, if you're submitting physical copies, they'll ask you to do things like not use staples, since they have to just disassemble them to distribute them to the review committee. Either way, you always want to follow the funder's guidelines to a T. The first indicator of your credibility is whether or not you can follow directions. So if a funder reads your proposal and is interested in potentially funding your work, a next step they'll often take is to do their due diligence and research your organization's credibility, financial stability, and impact. And often when doing their due diligence, they'll review a nonprofit's profile on GuideStar. So if you attended our Introduction to Finding Grants workshop last week, then you'll remember that we talked about GuideStar nonprofit profiles. So you can use your profile as a tool to grow your organization's credibility and online presence. If you have 501c3 status, then your organization has a GuideStar profile. One part of your grant seeking plan should be to claim and update your nonprofit's profile. It's free and it's a great way to share information about your mission and work with millions of potential donors and funders. So nonprofit profiles on GuideStar go well beyond IRS data and provide opportunities for you to create a fuller, publicly available picture of your nonprofit than what is included on your 990. So as you complete your profile, you can earn seals of transparency, which indicate that you have key information on your nonprofit profile. So the amount of information you provide determines which of the 4 seals you earn. So there are 4 levels of seals. First is bronze, which you can earn by sharing your mission and basic contact information so that donors can find you. Silver, which you earn by providing program information and brand details. Next is gold, which is earned by sharing financial and leadership information to help you gain trust and support. And then finally is the platinum seal of transparency, which is the highest level seal you can earn. In order to earn this seal, you must share how you measure your progress and results. So this is a great way to show your organization's impact. So we've talked about that a little bit throughout today's presentation. So nonprofit profiles on GuideStar not only appear on the GuideStar website, but they appear on a ton of platforms, including Facebook, Amazon Smile, also large investment banks and companies that manage donations for private individuals often use GuideStar. And then I also want to specifically call it this section, which is grants management. So in the context of proposal writing, this is important to keep in mind because if you apply to a grant at a foundation online, the grant management software likely is what you submit your application through. And then on the back end, the program officers of the foundation use the software to review and track your application. And this software often links to your GuideStar profile. And foundations are most likely going to be using your GuideStar profile as part of their due diligence when considering applicants for grants. So for example, foundations love checking potential grantees' financial health as part of their due diligence. So it will make things much easier for you, more streamlined if you have an updated GuideStar profile. So it's really easy to claim and update your profile. Just go to guidestar.org. If you don't already have an account, you can create one. And then once you're approved, you can start updating the profile. And multiple people at your organization can have access. I always tell people if you have an organizational email, like at freelibrary.org, make sure you use that instead of like an @Gmail address. It's just going to make the verification process a little bit faster. And then from there, so you just would either click create an account or sign in, and then you would click on get started now to start updating your profile. So they have a really great help section on their website, help.guidestar.org. So if you do have any questions, you can definitely look at that. You can also reach out to the Regional Foundation Center. We're happy to assist. Last month we did a workshop, actually, sorry, not last month, back in December. We did a workshop on GuideStar, and I have a link to that webinar recording in your resource guide. And then I do want to mention a promotion that they are currently doing. So if your organization earns a gold seal of transparency before the end of the year, then you can get free access to Foundation Director Line Essential for a year. So this is only applicable to organizations whose annual revenue or expenses is less than $500,000. So definitely take advantage of that really great opportunity. All right, any questions about GuideStar? Somebody asked suggestions for organizations or programs with fiscal sponsors to demonstrate these points of transparency. I mean, whether or not you're working with a fiscal sponsor or not, you're still going to be talking about the specifics of your organization. Are you talking about in relation to GuideStar profile? Because if you're a fiscally sponsored organization, you unfortunately cannot have a GuideStar profile. I know that's something they mentioned they might add in the future, but for now it is not an option. But usually when you're applying for a grant with a funder using a fiscal sponsor, that's stated somewhere in the application. So they know that they're not going to necessarily be able to find you in GuideStar. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay, we have a lot more to get through in only 20 more minutes. So I'm going to plow through here. So I do really want to spend a little bit of time talking about the follow-up because it is really important part of the process. And like I said, one that people often forget. So, once you've submitted the grant proposal, you've really done all that you can do. So you just kind of have to sit back and wait for that decision, which may be the hardest part of the process. But regardless of whether the answer is yes or no, this is where the real work begins. So if you do get the grant, congratulations. You'll receive a grant agreement letter from the funder before you receive the actual check. And you want to make sure to review and sign that and send it back to the funder before they'll send you the check. You want to make sure that you're keeping your funder informed and be responsive. So send them a letter of thank you, letting them know once again, not only your appreciation for the grant, but tell the funder, how this grant is going to make a difference to the people that you serve. And keep in mind that receiving a grant isn't the end of the process. It's actually really just the beginning of the relationship. Your funder is your partner now, and during the course of the grant period, you'll want to keep your program officer informed about how the project is going. So that means sending all required reports and sending them on time. In addition, if your project has made a significant accomplishment or you've achieved some kind of milestone, by all means, send a note or make a phone call to let them know. If you're hosting an event, you can certainly invite them. They may not be able to come, but they still may appreciate being invited. So this type of communication is a good way to build a relationship with a funder, and it can help pave the way for a renewal request. All right, so what do you do if the answer is no? So the odds are that 1 out of 3 funders will say yes, if you're lucky, and the other 2 will say no. But keep in mind that a no is not necessarily a never, and you definitely don't want to take it personally and give up too quickly. So find out why, but do it graciously. So some funders will not have a specific reason for why they didn't give you a grant. It's usually because there's just not enough funding to go around. So it's perfectly acceptable to ask whether you can try again in the future. So if they say, yes, please do try again in the future, then you can certainly keep foundation staff informed of your good work and the progress that you're making. This shows the funder that you are committed to your work and mission and are determined to do the work with or without their grant. But you want to make sure you keep these communications strategic and effective. Don't just add them to your mailing list. However, it's also possible that they will tell you that for one reason or another, perhaps they're going to change their giving priorities. Applying again won't be worth your time. So I always recommend asking for feedback after you've received a no. It can help you find out whether A, you can apply for a grant with that funder in the future, and B, maybe there were things that could be improved about your application that could help you with other grant applications. Either way, it will be time to devise a new strategy and move on. All right, so here are some of the key takeaways we talked about today. start with an outline that will help you better organize your thoughts and pinpoint the key things you want to say. Keep the language clear and concise. Avoid jargon or acronyms that the average reader wouldn't understand, but also tell a compelling story. Make it persuasive. Focus on the funder's interests, not just your own. Do your research and know who you're approaching and why. Always follow the funder's guidelines and be sure to revise and edit before submitting. I think one of the most valuable things a nonprofit can do is have somebody outside their organization read over a grant proposal. Not necessarily to tell them, content wise, if everything is 100%, true or accurate, more about, does it make sense as somebody as an outsider? Are you using acronyms that people outside your organization are not going to understand? Take advantage of this amazing coalition you all have and see if any of you would be, grant readers for each other. It's a really great way to get feedback on your applications. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a couple of resources. Give me 1 second. So first, I'm going to show you the Philanthropy Network's website. So this is where you can find the Common Grant application. So this is linked to in your resource guide, but I just want to show you how you access it. So through the Philanthropy Network's website, I'm going to go to resources and for nonprofits. So on here, we have the Common Grant application section. They have it listed as a PDF and as a Word document. I'm just going to briefly open up the PDF and show you what this looks like. So they have a lot of information here. I want to jump to this section here, the proposal narrative. So right here, if you're requesting a grant for a specific project or program, these are the questions you'll have to provide answers to in the proposal. How do you plan to accomplish your goals? How will you measure impact, etc.? Essentially all the same questions that I've gone over today. You'll also see a really nice budget template in here as well. So if you need kind of some guidance on a budget template, you can look at that. And then at the very bottom is the very small list. Oops, went too far. Very small list of the funders who do accept this application. So there's only 5. Like I said, it's not really used very much anymore, but I still like to show it to people, especially if you're new to grant writing and would like to get a sense of what an application might look like. And then the other resource I wanted to show you is learning.candid.org or Candid Learning. So this is a free website from Candid. So they're the same nonprofit that put together Foundation Directory Online. So on here, a couple things are, if you're not in the Philadelphia area, you can click on Find Candid Near Me, put in your zip code, city, etc., and you can find the closest funding information network to you. They also have lots of training opportunities, so online webinars, self-paced learning classes. And then under this resources section, I want to highlight the sample documents. So if you're new to grant writing and would like to see what a good grant proposal looks like, you can check out these sample documents. So they have proposal budgets and full grant proposals. So you can download the grant and you can read through the grant so you can see what a good grant proposal looks like. You can also read through comments from the funder as to why it was a successful grant proposal. So you do need to create a free account to download the grant proposals, but I definitely recommend checking those out. Lots of great information there. Okay, so let me go back to my slides. Okay. So we only have about 10 more minutes. I'm going to skip ahead just for a second. So if anyone does need to leave soon, I just want to highlight, these are the upcoming workshops we're doing as part of our Diversify Your Funding series. I also want to specifically highlight a workshop we're going to be doing on March 29th. So for anyone interested in learning more about Philly's health landscape, particularly information on social determinants of health, I definitely recommend you check out this workshop. Our presenter is from the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. And she will not only be talking about health data, but also helping attendees understand opportunities to improve health equity, racial justice, and address trauma. And if your organization is not currently collecting data on, or your data collection can be improved, we're also going to be touching on that. So if you're kind of looking for some statistics to bulk up some of your proposals, this might be a really good workshop for you to attend. So as I mentioned before, all of those upcoming workshops are on our website. Okay, so I know we're running a little short on time, but I do want to make sure you all walk away having maybe started something, putting a few things down. So in your resource guide, there is a link to a project outline. So I've talked about, how important it is to start with an outline. So this worksheet is a really great template for outlining your thoughts and just helping you write the best proposal that you can. So it's the second link in your resource guide. So if you want to pull it up, you can. It's not necessary though, because we're going to just spend some time working on the first section of that project outline, which is the need statement. So what I'd like you to do is spend a few minutes thinking about how you would answer the question about your need, the need of your project. So remember that your statement of need tells the reader what problem you're trying to solve and why they should care. Also remember that the need statement, again, is not about the need of your organization. So it's not like, oh, we need money, we need staff, we need resources. It's about the need of your, what it is you're trying to achieve. So to help you think through your need statement, you can jot down a sentence or a couple of bullet points for each of these questions. So the first question is, what is the need for the project? So is it a serious problem or issue, or is it a lack of a needed service? Who is affected by the problem and how? So who is your specific population being served? What facts or statistics can back up the need of your project? You don't have to worry about putting a specific number or statistic right now, but maybe you could start to think where you would get these statistics from, both internally and externally. Can you put a human face on the problem? So while statistics and data are really important, you want to remember that people give to people, not numbers. So if you have an anecdote or a success story that you can share, it will help put a human face on your program. And then the last question is, what is your solution to the problem? So just take a few minutes. You can either write this out on a scrap piece of paper, open up an email draft or a Word document, and just start to think through some of the answers to these questions. So let's take like 5 minutes. I'll share a link to the resource guide in just a minute. Yes. So take 5 minutes and try to answer some of these questions. And if you have any questions, let me know. So I dropped the link to the resource guide in the chat. And the second link on there is the project outline. So take like one more minute. Hopefully you had a chance to get something written down, but take another minute and then we'll come back together. All right, so I apologize there wasn't more time to work on that, but hopefully you at least kind of have a sense of some of the questions that to start thinking about. If anyone needs to leave, I know we're just about at 11:30, so please feel free to do so. I did drop a link to the program evaluation in the chat, and I think TJ will send it out as well after the workshop. But I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask me last minute questions, or if anyone wants to share kind of their experience with thinking through these questions. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was there something that you struggled